What's going on, everybody? I got another tutorial here for you today. As you can see, we've got the Xbox 360 Slim. Um, this is going to be a little bit of a long video because we're going to be doing a lot of talking. When we're dealing with an issue like this, there's like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things that can cause um, these kind of issues. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through each one of them in order from basically the easiest and cheapest fixes, moving on to more advanced stuff through the video. And this is all going to be about a console that doesn't power on, an Xbox 360 Slim, of course, like I said. Um, there's a lot of different facets of things that we're going to have to look at here. And I am going to give you a few fixes and stuff like that. I'm also going to talk about options for some things because some things are going to be a little more difficult to repair and might not be practical for people. So we'll talk about that as well. So we're going to dig right into it. The first things first that we want to really talk about, if you've got a Slim, and this really applies to all the Xbox 360s, if you've got a Slim or the E or even a Fat, all of your different power supplies are very similar in that they have an LED indicator on the end. Like you can see, this one's for the E. I can even show you here on the Fat too. This one you can see, and that's yellow right now. This is for the Xbox 360 Fat. They all have an LED indicator, and if your Xbox 360 doesn't want to power on at all, like you don't hear any noises, the green light doesn't pop on for even half a second, then you want to start there with your power supply. The first most obvious thing is the power supply itself could be bad, and there's a couple of quick ways you can try that. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to replicate this to show you on camera exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of demonstrate real quick. The reason why I mentioned this LED indicator, as you saw with the Fat one that I showed you, that one's actually plugged in right now, and it has a yellow kind of standby light. It can also be green when it's running, and red for basically like a catastrophic failure. If you plug everything into your console, try to turn it on, and nothing happens at all. Or even if it turns on and turns right back off, no red ring of death, no red lights on the front of the Xbox itself. Check your power supply now and keep it plugged. Like after you try, keep it plugged in and look, because if this light has turned red, it's an indication that most of the time you've got a bad power supply, and so you're going to have to replace the power supply. There can be other issues that cause the light to go red. Now, when we're dealing with the Slim specifically, and I can just give you a brief synopsis, basically. This is actually an original Xbox motherboard, but just one I have right behind me. There are all kinds of these right here, these little capacitors. And on the Xbox 360 Slim, they actually use really high-end caps, and so busted caps are technically possible on the Xbox 360 Slim. And so if you're getting the red light on your power supply, and let's say you have a spare power supply or you buy a replacement power supply and it still gets the red light, more than likely you're actually dealing with a motherboard issue, and it's usually going to be something to do with busted capacitors. But like I said, this is very rare because they use a much different setup, even compared to the Xbox 360 Fat. They use much better capacitors on the Slim, and so we shouldn't even have many issues with that for a very long time. But that's just something to keep in mind, because you could replace your power supply, and then it turns out like you get the red light with the second one too. Technically, that power supply could also be bad, but more than likely, especially if you knew it was working or if they work, with other consoles, then it's going to be an issue with that motherboard. And at that point, if you can either recap it if you do find busted caps. Obviously, that's going to be your cheaper method. There's a lot of caps on there, though, so just be prepared. It's going to be a lot of caps to buy and a lot of time to do that kind of a job. For everyone else at that stage, you would want to look into replacing the motherboard, which isn't too extensive. And again, it's not something I'm going to go through in here, just because that is like a whole video by itself. But this is just what you need to keep in mind when you're first looking at reasons why the Xbox 360, isn't turning on. Your next one is actually going to be one where I do have a good example. This console right here has this, and a lot of people may or may not even consider this, it not turning on. But there's also a lot of different little things that can happen. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to deal with the second issue. Now I'm going to go ahead and plug this console in. I'm not worried about putting the AV cable in yet or anything. But when you're first testing, well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what happens with this console is, as you can tell, if you got your volume up loud enough, and I know the mic on this is not the best, but you hear it try to make the power on noise, but as you can see, no lights come onto the front. On the power supply too, it's still yellow, so there's no error code there. So it's trying to power on, but it's just not working. A lot of times what you're going to end up having an issue with is either the faceplate itself, or there's an RF PCB module underneath here that it kind of attaches to the faceplate and everything. That can also get jacked up and go bad. In fact, those are actually really poorly designed in the Slim. It can cause quite a few issues. There's going to be quite a few tutorials I cover that on. So what we're going to do now is I'm not going to show you how to completely disassemble the console. So what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to get all the shell off, but still have the faceplate on. And that way I can show you how to kind of work with that. Because again, this is the second step, and these are usually pretty cheap. Like me, myself, and I am going to put some links in the description. I sell the parts that I'm talking about here, and you're talking about, $10 to $15 parts in some cases here. The RF module is usually about 15. Faceplate, is anywhere from 10 to 20, depending on what kind of faceplate and stuff like that. Usually it averages around 12 to 13 for new faceplate. And I'll put links in the description of this video so you can check out afterwards if you realize that this is what your problem is. So I'm going to do that off camera now. And once I get it all fully disassembled, we'll move on with actually getting that stuff replaced. Okay, guys, so as you can see, I've got the outer case on. I just realized, too, one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning, you will see I wear anti-static gloves. And I also just wanted to bring that up. You really don't have to do this. I just have gotten in such the habit because I deal with so many consoles that I do every once in a while had an issue with static electricity causing problems. So it's something you can consider, but it's very rare. One of the biggest things is having a console unplugged while you're dealing with it. That should be obvious, but if you've got a static charge and it's plugged in, it can cause even more damage. So as long as you're leaving it unplugged while we're dealing with some of these actual component parts, you're going to be fine. I've gotten in the habit of it now, so you're going to see me wearing these gloves. So like I said, I've got all this taken off. I've got the faceplate. It's still here. Now, while you're handling this is very loose. Be very careful because there is a part that just falls apart, really easily, the ribbon for this. And it subsequently, could be one of the issues what we're having. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to start with the faceplate itself. Now, I'm going to do the best I can to get this on camera. Once you've got all the shell pieces off, it can just come off and go like this. However, there is a ribbon, as you can see right here, that goes into your RF board PCB here. If you've got damage to this ribbon, you can try to check it out, but believe it or not, some of the damage to the ribbon may not be that obvious. Like this one right here, overall looks pretty good. I do see a small place right there that might be an issue, but actually I think that's just part of it. I don't really see any bends or creases, because if this is actually bent at any point, like it can break the trace, and therefore that could be a reason why this won't turn on. Now, this is, with the way this console was when you saw it, where you could hear the noise, it's going to be a lot less likely that this is the culprit for this issue. But if you do have damage to this ribbon, obviously, it's not going to send the signal when you try to turn it on when you touch the button, because all that is just a touch sensor. So once you touch it, if there's a break on these lines, it's not going to send the signal, and obviously the console's not going to turn on. So that's why I wanted to address this. So there's really not much to this. You've just got to be careful how you take it off. So what you need is, I just use a little small flathead screwdriver. This is like one of those jewelry size ones that are really small. If you take a look at the ribbon where it connects here, the ribbon has a safety connection that goes all the way around, so you can't just pull it out like most ribbons. So what you got to do is you got to go behind it, and you got to lift it, and we're lifting the actual clip part until it kind of comes up and over. Then we can actually take the actual clip part, we can open it, you'll see it slides open, and then the ribbon will come out freely. Now, putting it back together is the exact same thing. Now, since we're kind of doing this in a way that's troubleshooting, I would say after you put the new faceplate on, as you'll see, this one's actually a glossy finish. Once you put the new faceplate on, I really wouldn't suggest putting it all back together, because if this ends up being not your problem, you're just going to have to take it all back apart and move on to the next part. So putting it back on is really just the same concept. What we want to do is, while simultaneously getting the actual connection part to go in, we're also letting this loop part go around the back. Now, I just use my fingers. If you need to use the little flathead to kind of get this down, you do want to make sure it gets down and around it, because that does help it if it gets yanked, to try to prevent a little bit of damage. It doesn't help much, but it does something. All right, so now that's in there good. We close the clip back here for the connector. Everything looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to carefully place this back on here, lay it back down, and notice I'm stabilizing this every time I move it, because again, if it rips, then you'll end up damaging this one. So all I'm going to do is, I'm just going to plug it back in. Oopsie. Actually, I'm doing that backwards. And again, once you turn it on, make sure not to touch any of the electronic parts. The obvious reason being you'll get electrocuted, the other one being that you could damage it. Okay, sorry guys, I cut it there for a second. My air compressor popped on and was super loud, so I had to pause it and cut this back in there. As I was saying, now that we've got this set up and plugged in, well, all we're going to do is we're going to test it. That way you didn't have to reassemble the entire thing, and you can still test it. So, as you remember with mine, it makes the noise, but it won't do anything. So even after putting a new faceplate in, that didn't fix it. And like I said a few minutes ago, I was pretty sure that was the case already, because it was obviously getting some sort of connection. So we're going to move on to the next step now. That also means that the old faceplate is perfectly fine. So the next one we're going to do, I'm going to unplug this again. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to quickly remove this faceplate that we just put on there. Okay, so the reason why we're taking that back out again is because the next culprit, and one of the more common ones, and what I'm hoping is causing my issue here on this console, is going to be this RF module here. This is a really janky part. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't know every single in and out of what's wrong on this thing, and it can cause a lot of other issues. Like if your controller won't sync, it's almost always the culprit of this right here. So what we're going to do is, this is a T10 or a T8 screws right here, and we're actually going to remove those and get this out, because what we're going to do is we're essentially going to be replacing it. Now, forgot to have that ready, so give me 1 second. Okay, so I've got my T8 Torx screwdriver head, and we've got some screws we're going to take out here. Okay, and then hang on to them screws. And then this just pulls right out. It's real simple. It's got a plug on the back. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace it with another one. So I've got another one ready. And I know this one's working because this one was pulled off another console. And so I tested everything and it was working great. So I know that if this doesn't fix my issue, or, you know, if you do the same thing, then you know you're dealing with a totally different issue. So we're not going to worry about screwing that back in. What we're going to do is we're going to plug it back in, and we're going to hope. Oh, well, it might help if I put the faceplate back on. Although technically you can turn these on. The lines right here underneath the clip that the faceplate connects to, if you touch those, it will actually turn it on. I wouldn't recommend that though. And I'm not going to tell you to do that officially, just letting you know that you could do that. If maybe you also were worried about your faceplate being jacked up still for some reason, or maybe you accidentally damaged it, you can still go on with testing it. Okay, so we're just wedging that back in there like we just talked about. Oh, that's kind of caught. There we go. Okay, so we got that. I'm going to get it set back down, get it plugged in, and we're going to hope. Nope. So that means the RF board on this one is also not fixing our problem. Now, for most of you, especially if you know the power supply is good, and it doesn't make the beep noise or anything like that, that's usually a pretty common culprit, is that RF board. So most of you are probably going to be good after that step. And again, that's called the RF board or the RF module if you need to look that part up. And again, I will have a link in this description. So I wanted to show you real quick here the motherboard itself, and so I went ahead and took a couple more screws out so I could just kind of get this out of the way quickly. These right here are all the capacitors I was talking about. If you've gotten to this stage and you're 100% sure, you've already tried to switch out change out your parts, you've already double checked the power supply and you know you're good there, it's almost definitely going to be the motherboard. In this case, I'm even wondering if this is actually, for this console, could even be a variation of the red ring that's just not populating on the RF board itself, since it is trying to turn on and stuff. The only difference is obviously the fan is not turning on. With these caps right here, if you monitor, there's a whole bunch through the console through here. Take a look at them, see if you see any like discharge, any leakage that are coming out the bottom of them. These types will pop from the top, but it's a lot more rare. A lot of times you're going to see leakage from the bottom of these. And then truth be told, you could just have caps that look pretty good with very little leakage that are dead. And if that's the case, that's what's going to cause some of these issues. So you can look into replacing all your caps and doing a recap on the motherboard. If you've got the skills and the equipment to do that, you do need much higher temperature soldering iron than any basic one. As an example, I've got an actual soldering station that goes up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you're going to need something kind of advanced to replace these caps because it is a little bit harder than most other things. So just keep that in mind. And if you're at this point where you're still having the issue with the power on, it's definitely going to be something else with the motherboard. And may not even be related to the caps. At that point, your best bet is simply going to be replacing the motherboard itself. And again, I will put a link in there because that's pretty simple. Additionally, I'm going to make another tutorial about switching out the disk drive and stuff like that. So that's going to go with that a little bit. But yeah, if you're at this point, you've got some sort of major hardware failure, you know, if you really wanted to, you could take it somewhere. So see if a reflow on the CPU, GPU would help. But, you know, it's really unlikely when you're dealing with an issue where you don't have power, where that's going to help you at all. Like I said, in this case, since I've tried all the common ones and it still makes the beep noise, I think maybe it's just something similar to a red ring on this one. Just didn't appear that way at first. Because I have had a lot of them where they'll want to try to start, but the fan won't spin and it won't ever actually power on, and it does end up being that front RF board. So there's just multiple things that you got to look at, and that's why I wanted to do this video. So most of the times it just goes over one little piece of it, and this way you can go through all of it. Anyways, make sure to check that description. You'll be able to find the links like I was talking about. If you're thinking that a motherboard is going to be your next best bet, you can definitely check my channel on my page because I'm going to be doing that tutorial actually here shortly. And there are some ins and outs about that you need to understand. It's not, quite so simple. I wouldn't call it hard, but, there's some steps to it. So I'll also see if I can put a link to that somewhere maybe in the video. We'll see if I can do something like that as well. Anyways, thanks guys for watching. Hopefully a lot of you are going to solve some of your issues, especially with that front RF board and the faceplate. You would be really shocked how many of these I run into, and that's the problem, is that either this front RF board or your faceplate. So anyways, guys, appreciate you watching, and until next time.